Welcome everyone, welcome to Marion House, and I've got a lovely panel here today. Just to make sure that all of you are getting questions ready for the panelists. Every panelist will speak for 15 minutes, and I'll give you a warning when you have 5 minutes left. And if all goes to plan, we'll have 15 minutes at the end of our section for discussion and Q&A. So think about questions for each presenter, and you can ask them in the end. And our first presenter here today would be Yu-Hsuan Su. Apologize if I mispronounce your name. Yu-Hsuan is an economic researcher at the Taiwan External Trade Development Council and an adjunct lecturer in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literature at National Jiangxi University in Taipei, Taiwan, where he teaches courses on Ukrainian and culture. From 2018 to 2024, he served as director of Taiwan Trade Center in Kiev, in Ukraine, and he also translates Ukrainian literary works into Mandarin for publication in Taiwanese journals and media outlets. And his research interests include Ukrainian history, early Soviet cinema, and the reception of Slavic languages in East Asia. Over to you, Yu-Hsuan, and your presentation is on making Soviet Belarus, Belgoskino, and the search of national imagery in 1920s Soviet cinema.
Thank you very much, Elena. It should be, okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, actually, you can even sit here because you can see the screen better.
Okay, good morning. My topic is called Making Soviet Belarus, Belgoskino in the Search of National Imagery in 1920s Soviet Cinema. So this topic came to me when I was working in Ukraine. I used to live there for 7 years. I studied at National University of Kiev Mohyla Academy, working on my PhD thesis on Soviet Ukrainian cinema of that time. So I found that we all know that Soviet montage, Soviet cinema was quite famous in the history of world cinema, but very few of us could appreciate these masterpieces or films produced by other national republics as our field was always Russocentric. So it was my intention to study not only Ukrainian cinema, but also other national republics. Today it will be Belarusian. So here I listed, just give you a picture of what Soviet cinema in the 1920s was like. So it was all silent film era. So all films were made without sound, only with some music or like a music company. So here I listed all the film studios founded in the 1920s. Here you can see that. Of course, there are many Russian cinemas. They're mostly location-based. For example, the first one is Goskino. It's based in Moscow. Sevzapkino is based in Leningrad. And you have Belgoskino, you have Ukrainian one called Vuvku, Всеукраїнське фотокіно управління, based in both Odessa and Kiev. And you have the Georgian one, Armenian one, and the Central Asian one. But among all these, the most powerful ones were actually, apart from the Russian ones, were the Ukrainian ones and the Georgian ones, because they had the film industry before the revolution, and they have the basis and they have the talents to make the films. So speaking of Soviet cinema, we might think of these famous avant-garde or montage films like Battleship of Potemkin, Человек с киноаппаратом, or Zemlya, all these films. But actually, at the time, what's the ordinary people, what's the audience like? They do not like these art house films, all these avant-garde films. The most popular ones are these kind of films. For example, the first one is called Klasnaya Dievoleta, made by the Georgian director Podlasie. And second one is called Extraordinary Adventures of Mr. West in the Land of Bolsheviks. So it's a story about a person called Mr. West, obviously American, and landing in the land of the Soviet Union and having this adventure. Or the right one is the Aelita. It is adapted from the Russian writer Alexei Tolstoy, the sci-fi films. So sci-fi films, adventure films, or this melodrama, these are the genres or the types that is popular at the time. So entering the Soviet period, the theme's focus has been changed in accordance with the Soviet ideology. So now they have to make films like peasant uprising, workers' strike, revolution, civil war, or like policies like collectivization or decolonization. And you don't make films like in the old times, like adaptations of Tolstoy or Pushkin. You have to make films that is meaningful. So there was a conflict at the time among these filmmakers and among these writers and intellectuals that we should make films that is Soviet enough, socialist enough to propagandize people. But the other people, they think that commercial films, blockbusters should be made, and they were always being criticized by the party called Mishanskaya Drunavkusia, that bad taste trash. So this is the main two schools of these filmmakers. On the right, this film is called Tretya Mishanskaya. It's about the love triangle story, about two men and one woman living together at the apartment and having this kind of strange relationship, which is extremely popular at the time. Next, I'm giving you some clues or some basis about how Belgoskino was created. As you can see, that film industry was emphasized by Lenin as he found out that it's an instrumental and it's a powerful instrument to have this propaganda work, to promote what you want to say to the normal people. So in 1919, he nationalized the film industry. Later, as we know that in the early of 1920s, colonization policy was introduced. It aims to train national cadres or elites, and also to do linguistic localization, meaning that all the official documents, all the publications can be used in your local language. So in Soviet Ukraine, Ukrainian language is used for journals, for conference proceedings, and in Belarus it's the same situation. So in December 1924, Belgoskino was created, combining 4 movie theaters in Minsk and Vitebsk, and to monopolize the film exhibition and production at the territory of Soviet Belarus. However, at the time, money is one issue to make films because it's extremely expensive to make films. So as I mentioned, before the revolution, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Georgia, there was film industry, but there was nothing in Belarus. So the Soviet regime introduced this NEP policy. It was implemented in different national republics. It was extremely successful in Ukraine, but not in Belarus. So Soviet Belarus at the time was lack of financial resources and talents. And also at that time in Minsk, there's a lack of stable electricity because you will need electricity also to support your equipment to shoot film. The third aspect is creative basis. So who were these filmmakers? Because we know that cinema is a new art form introduced only at the beginning of 20th century. So in the Russian Empire or in the Soviet Union, not many people know how to make films. So where did they come from and where did they learn how to make films? Here's what Vuvku was like. So the Ukrainian Vuvku was like, there was film studios in Yalta in the pre-revolutionary era. So they invite Russian pre-revolutionary film veterans. They made films before the revolution in the 1910s. Directors like Pyotr Chadenin or Vladimir Gardin also because I say they are financially quite capable, so they invited French, German, even like Turkish directors, cinematographers to make films in a film studio in Odessa. Also, they recruit people from theatrical and writers circles. So theatrical directors and actors and designers would join the film studios to make films. And writers would also join to write movie scripts or to edit intertitles for these silent films. Turning back to Belarus, Belgoskino in its early years made three representative films. The first one is called Lesnaya Byl, Tale of the Woods. It told the story of the 1920 Soviet-Polish War, how these Belarusian partisans defeated these Polish occupiers. The second one is called Prostytutka. It's about a tragic fate of a widow was forced to becoming a prostitute. Later was assisted by other women and kind of joining this kind of a proletarian future. The third film is called Kastus Kalinowski. Obviously, it's a biopic of Kalinowski, depicting this the biography of this national hero. But if you compare the Ukrainian studio and the Belarusian studio, you will find the resources, the output, achievements were quite different. This is also the Ukrainian Vuvku. They founded even a journal exclusively devoted to cinema called Kino. They introduced like Japanese cinema at the time, Jewish cinema, or like they would film like biopic of Taras Shevchenko. Also, they write movie theories, movie novels, because before we only know that there's Eisenstein, there's Pudovkin. These people are using this Marxist dialectics to make the Soviet montage. But actually in Odessa, these Ukrainian intellectuals and movie theories also create their own narratives. Sure. Here are some cases of what the Ukrainian cinema was like. So they created a film called Alim. It's a kind of like a Crimean Tatar Robin Hood, or they adapted from Ukrainian classics. They even adapted foreign works like Romanian novel, French novel, or Ukrainian classics, emphasizing or kind of elaborating the rights of the new rights for women in the new Soviet world. Compared to this, you can find that the resource for Belgoskino, for Belarus, was quite restricted. So for the case of Vuvku, the Ukrainians, they managed to produce 140 films during its 8-year existence. But the same period, Belgoskino created only around 10 films. So around 1 or 2 films per year. Unlike Russian one or Ukrainian ones, they create 20 films per year. Another clue, how do we explore, how do they make films? The process, the details, the nuances of film production in Soviet Belarus of the time is from newspaper Sovetskaya Belarus. So also, luckily, I purchased this wonderful collection yesterday from our colleagues. For example, there are intellectuals or filmmakers would ask, as I said, it's founded in the end of 1924, but there was no film in 24, 25, 26. So people started to ask, please forgive my Belarusian pronunciation. Kalish na nareshche u nas bude belaruskaya kinofilm. When we finally have our own Belarusian cinema. And spinite estradную артуру, staba pop trash. Or they would also write review of Belgoskino's films or interview with the director asking about the production process. And there was a great debate in the club. Many filmmakers, officials from the organization, from the party, and writers, they're debating what kind of films we really need. So to compare, you can see that how to make this national cinema. People usually use it in different ways. First is to film a biopic of your national hero. In the Ukrainian case, it could be Taras Shevchenko, the national poet, or the Zaporizhian Kazakhs. In a Belarusian case, it's Kastus Kalinovsky. Or you can make historical drama and to adapt it a bit, or to change a bit. Or you can adapt literary classics, which is the case for Tales of the Woods, Lisnaya Pil. It's adapted, Lisnaya Pil, it's adapted from Mihas Charot by his novella. So to conclude, we can say that if we put them in parallel to compare, you can see the difference and the huge gap between the Ukrainian and the Belarusian film studios. So the colonization policy, the direct effect, did have some good effect on Ukrainian cinema, on language use, on culture change, on artistic output. But in Belgoskino, unfortunately, it does not exist. And both of them, they try to make this new Soviet Belarusian cinema or Soviet Ukrainian cinema, meaning that it's at the same time national, but also Soviet. National means filming biopics, filming historical drama. And Soviet, like they will film feminist themes to emphasize the different status and role of women in the new Soviet world. So considering all these restrictions in almost every aspect of Belgoskino, it does not have enough financial support. And in the first decade, actually, Belgoskino was not located in Minsk. It was located in Leningrad because, as I said, there was no stable electricity. There was no enough money. And all the all the experienced movie directors, they work in Leningrad or Moscow. So it's easy for them to invite these Russian directors to shoot films for them in Leningrad. And also the infrastructure, the talents. We don't have enough platform for these Belarusian poets or writers. In the Ukrainian case, they have many futurist poets joining cinema to write movie scripts, but it's not the case for Belarus. So considering all these restrictions, still, I think Belgoskino had done a good enough job to present these 1,000 of national films of the era. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Yu-Hsuan. Next presenter is Lisa. Sure. Yu-Hsuan might need to pass on the mic to the next presenter. Our next presenter is Elizaveta Kheresh, who is a PhD student in the Department of Slavic Languages and Literature at Harvard. She is a researcher of undergrad communities and contemporary poetry in Eastern Europe and identity formation in Soviet and post-Soviet Belarus. Lisa works in the fields of gender studies and intellectual history, and in 2023 she was awarded the Andrei Bely Prize in the Cultural Projects category. She is also a poet and translator from Italian, German, Polish, Belarusian and Yiddish, and her first poetry collection is My Boyfriend is Old Lord, and it was published in 2026 in Vinadroba Publishing House. Elizaveta's articles were also published in Skanda Slavica and Matica Srpska journals. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much for all being here, and thank you so much for inviting me. I would be talking about a very interesting case of interacting and trying to produce new artistic strategies to talk about Chernobyl disaster. And I would like to talk about it in the framework of eco-criticism and some kind of ontological rupture theory, which I will explain later. Eco-criticism, the field of study concerned with human-environment relations, has repeatedly addressed modernism as a mode of thought that instrumentalizes nature and legitimizes its exploitation for human purposes, including nation building. In the case of Belarus, modernization and industrialization were reflected in the economy of culture. On the one hand, Belarus was rapidly becoming an industrialized country during Soviet era. And on the other hand, the national project of Belarus relied heavily on the concept of nature and native land as tools of identification, reference, and resistance. Following the words of eco-critical scholar Jonathan Bate, Belarusian poetry about nature is neither romantic nor modernist and has never been apolitical. Nature is not a space of escapism or exclusively aesthetic pleasure. And in that framework, the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 was a pivotal moment in the development of contemporary eco-criticism in the Belarusian context. This man-made disaster also influenced faith in technological progress under the Soviet regime. Chernobyl became a symbol of the collapse of the modernist project, necessitating new models of mourning and grieving for a nature destroyed by technology. My paper will focus on the collection To Go Through the Zone, Пройти про зону, which is dedicated to the responses of Belarusian authors to the nuclear disaster. Published in 2001, the collection brings together poetry, prose, and journalism. The collection's diverse composition, including renowned writers, individuals outside the literary circle, former ascendant authors, and respected Soviet Belarusian poets, young and older poets, help present not a single narrative, but a multitude of voices discussing this tragedy. The social context, as well as the individual and collective experience of the Chernobyl catastrophe, created a unique pragmatic approach to the text that is distinct from a purely aesthetic one. I will demonstrate that the modes of discourse and description of the technological apocalypse did not originate in the late Soviet era or independent Belarus. In my view, they originated from the complexities of the modernist Belarusian national project, which simultaneously draws upon and constructs the concept of nature. Despite the socialist literary paradigm, Belarusian literature has developed form and genres that are familiar to Western readers. For instance, the text in this anthology can be examined through the lens of toxic consciousness. According to eco-critic Cynthia Deterin, this phenomenon marked a shift in the historical paradigm regarding nature and politics. Chernobyl was also the reason for reintroducing genres such as biblical apocalypses into literature. Even though before 1986, Izblok created many interesting examples of post-apocalyptic culture, Dead Man's Letter by Konstantin Lopushinsky, Solaris by Andrei Tarkovsky based on the Polish novels by Stanisław Lem, Oba, then Civilization by the Polish director Piotr Shulkin, Chernobyl disaster was a physically embodied end of the world, whose happening was kept in secret. That led to the radical resignification of the cultural basis, literally production dedicated to the catastrophe, and informal network of political praxis. The publication of the anthology Пройти про зону represents a very important moment in Belarusian and post-Soviet literature. It is a discursive space where radical ontological rupture is performed. This rupture signifies the fundamental breakdown of the established philosophical, epistemological, and linguistic categories to which the modern subject traditionally relates to the external world, particularly nature and social structures. The impact of the catastrophe extends far beyond the physical landscape of contamination and evacuation. It penetrates the very structure of language, affect, and the semiotic of nature. For example, Belarusian philosopher Igor Popko develops the idea that Belarusian culture operates in a condition of semi-peripheral visibility, where cultural and political phenomena are simultaneously visible and structurally under-recognized. The Chernobyl disaster inaugurated a semiotic catastrophe, a crisis in signification where the natural world ceased to be a stable, legible signifier of home tradition or stable identity, and is instead violently reconfigured as a latent, permanent, and untrustworthy site of invisible threat. Moreover, it also embodied the non-functionality of socialist ideology and socialist theology, and demonstrated the need for a new understanding of time, place, history, and people's role in its movement. The re-semioticization demands new modes of expression that exceed the limits of rational humanist representation. This was the first page of this anthology. To say a little bit more about ontological rupture, this is the concept introduced by the Black study theorist Ray A. Judy. According to this theory, the subject that is being exposed to a catastrophe is stripped of its elementary illusion of autonomy and rational mastery. The subject transitions into sentient flesh, an existence defined by radical instability, chronic vulnerability, and a constant negotiation with unseen harm. This condition is characterized by three key registers: pre-linguistic affect, the immediate and mediated bodily experience of trauma, bodily vulnerability, the internalization of contamination, for example, radiation, where the body itself becomes a contested border between the safe self and the threatening environment, and the impossibility of representation. The trauma is too vast, too slow, and too invisible to be contained within traditional narrative forms. I would suggest you to look to the several examples from this ontology. For example, the reappearance of apocalyptic motives in the ontology, and I think that it further complicates the picture. References to the biblical catastrophe function as an attempt to articulate an event that resists secular explanatory models. The apocalypse in this context is less than an end than a mode of perception, one that foregrounds revelation and exposure. The invisible becomes visible, but what is revealed is not a divine order, but an extent of human entanglement with technological systems that exceed control. In this short poem by Ryhor Bradulin, well-known and acknowledged Belarusian poet, the Christian and non-Christian god, Christian god Bog and Perun, appeared as witnesses of the apocalypse in the absence of other authorities that could have done something to prevent it. And another interesting detail in this poem is the work with an idiom, sprinkle head with ashes, to claim your own defeat even before the official lose. God will walk barefoot through the heavenly flood, Perun will hide behind the clouds, the planet will sprinkle its head with radioactive ashes. And I think it's interesting that in the original, the syntaxis, the word order of adjective and noun is inverted, so it's populum at the first, and then the point, the radioactive ashes. It is the final point of this little poem. In another poem by Sergei Davidovich called Prayers, he encapsulates the disappointment and designification of the land as a source of stable identity and something that can preserve histories, both tragic and more hopeful. On this earth we live everything, childhood, youth, love, hopes, and eternal despair, and our eternal pain, and warm baths, and the graves of our relatives. The earth, which has always, from time immemorial, been warmed by work, watered by sweat, which fed both our ancestors and us, it is no longer the land of our ancestors, but the zone. The living and the dead, who are we now? We are the explosion of shadows, victims of the system. We are gone. Neither we nor life is here. Like a monument to crime, there is a dead zone. Oh, have mercy, mighty God, tell me, didn't we already have enough? The last example that I wanted to look at, it is the fragment of the poem of Lenin Golubovich. I would say that this is a very interesting, even fascinating example of aesthetic refusal made through aesthetic means, such as iambic pentameter without rhyme, so white verse. I write my verse about black misfortune, not for poetry lovers, I write for lovers of life, and in the names of those who loved life so much. So this white verse, it was often used in different literature tradition, for example, English and Russian, Belarusian, in elegies, a genre that is dedicated to mourning, meditation, and monologuing. And this is very interesting that even though the author is using this very sophisticated literature tradition, he rejects the idea that he's writing pure poetry, poetry for poetry, or for lovers of poetry. The anthology Прости Прозона serves as an archive, demonstrating that Chernobyl produced a profound ontological and semiotic rupture that challenged the expressive capacity of established literary forms. It reveals the inadequacy of humanist language to contain non-human, slow-motion, invisible disaster. In the Belarusian context, the catastrophe marked a transition from late Soviet regime of managed truth to a post-catastrophic condition in which knowledge itself became politically unstable. It is very interesting also to take into account that this catastrophe later led to a very important politically charged event, just by briefly mentioning the Chernobylsky Shlях, Chernobyl Path, and the appearance of the Vesna Center after the demonstration dedicated to the 10th anniversary to the Chernobyl catastrophe. We can see the importance of Chernobyl tragedy in political charging, and looking at the title of another very important article Kuropatı дорога смерти, Kuropatı is the path of death, we can see the spatial connotation of Belarusian nation building and epistemological project. So we see this multitude of paths or roads that should be walked together with people. Tamara Khundrova, Ukrainian scholar, believes that Chernobyl marks the beginning of Ukrainian postmodernist literature. In that, it renders the narrative not merely post-apocalyptic, but also invites us to view the multitude of voices and narrative as a new condition for the existence of culture, in opposition to totalitarian or forced poetics. Khundrova writes that this strategy was trivialized both by high culture, which sought to establish a single description of the truth, and by popular culture, drawn to the idea of a nuclear apocalypse. It seems to me that the anthology Прости Prazono operates in a different dimension, where languages and poetics coexist on equal terms, and where testimony proves more important than the chosen language, both literary. So in this anthology, there are texts written both in Russian and Belarusian, and there are also translation from Kurd language to Belarusian language, and figuratively. The space of experience and the space of language seek points of intersection not only to further refine language, but also to find one's own voice with the chorus of others. This is its multipolar democracy, unconnected to the tyranny of the majority. There is no tyranny either in its composition or in the representation of authors of very different aesthetic orientation. It would be productive to think about the literal and cultural myth of Podlasie being encountered within ecological and material realities after 1986. I would say that Podlasie is one of the most politically charged and differentiated identities outside big cities, starting with the project of the Polesky Journal in Samizdat, and ending with the book My Grandma is the Director of the Morgue, My Baba Director Morgu, written in Polesky dialect, Poleskaya Gavorka, that obtained readers and several literature awards. Presenting Polesky identity as a special place within Belarusian time and space, it can interact with post-Chernobyl world by proposing new narrative by non-traditional narrators. Another thing that I wanted to propose for participants to think about is the concept of corrupted, disabled land as a concept not to be fixed by returning to the pre-catastrophic condition, but by reimagining it as an object of care. Refusal to engage with the concept of land as able-bodied, healthy, and reproductive fertile can widen the nation-building project over the demand of good quality soil. However, maybe it is the exact practice of working with vulnerable, sick, and contaminated bodies, especially through the consequences of colonial violence, can give new meanings and new purposes of growing and living together. To pass through a zone not only with dignity, but compassion. Moreover, it also allows us to see not only sentient flesh, alternative understanding of body that is excluded from the definition of human, but sentient ground, land that is not fertile, neither can be inhabited. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Our next presenter has a very delicious presentation. It's Katarzyna Mazur, who will be talking about the influence of Belarusian minority on the development of Podlasie cuisine, a cultural and culinary analysis of the Borderland region. Katarzyna is a Brazilian studies scholar and a PhD student at the University of Warsaw, and she specializes in linguistics. And Katarzyna's research focuses on issues related to the identity of ethnic, national, and regional minorities. Her main fields are anthropology, ethnology, and linguistics. And Kasia is passionate about theater, indigenous languages, and the culinary traditions of minority groups. Please, Kasia. I can testify to the great accomplishments of Podlasie cuisine. Big fan. No, that was yesterday's.
I have some with yesterday.
I saw it.
No.
No. I can show you the slides if you get back to the list. Go back to the list for a sec. It's
one, right?
yeah. Station Katarzyna.
No, but it's offline.
No, it's not.
So
Something like
can you
this.
see it here on the list somewhere else? If not, we'll go to the mailbox.
I think it's better if we go to the main one. Yeah.
Just a second, yeah, we'll find the right slides, which of course will be much better. If I forward it to you,
This is the one?
Yeah.
I found it.
Yep.
I hope you had good breakfast. It's just not fair announcing a culinary topic and not offering proper refreshments beforehand. You should think about it for next year. Nearly there.
Is it PDF or is it?
PDF, yeah.
Would you be able just to scroll down if it's a PDF? Yeah, Jarek.
I
It's not going on.
think it should possible just to click the same
Okay.
thing. I assume the online participants can see this. So just this one or use the arrows.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Elena, for the introduction. My topic probably will be the lightest one. Yes, I've made a various project about the cuisine, mostly based on the Portuguese one, passing through the islands, Madeira, Açores, and so on. But today I'll be talking about the influence on the Belarusian minority on the development of the Podlasie cuisine. So will be based on this borderland region. I remember my first visit to Podlasie as a young kid, right? And I remember how amazed I was by the variety of cultures, different religions, ethnic groups. Maybe you already know that Poland, in terms of the language, is really monolinguistics. We do not have that much variety in terms of different dialects. So let's say I cannot say if someone from where someone is coming from just by hearing the accent. And from my perspective, from the Portuguese, when I go to any part of Portugal, even it's really small country, I can vary. I will know from where the person is coming from. Even the small city, even the small island, even in Poland, we do not have it anymore. We do have regional languages, right? But we cannot vary this dialect. Okay, but let us focus on Podlasie. Talking about the variety, as Barwiński highlight, is the Podlasie region, so the eastern part of Poland, is currently one of the most ethnically diverse regions in Poland. It's both a state borderline between Poland and Belarus, an internal borderline in terms of ethnicity, religion, languages, and culture. The dominant ethnic group are Poles, but also Belarusians, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Tatars, Romes, Armenians, Russians, and Karaites. And it's like a mosaic of nationalities, religions, languages, and cultures. But let us pass to the Belarusian minority in Podlasie. As Andrzej Skórko sublimed in the Nasza Niva in 2006, he called Belarusians as maleńka skwarka u wielkiej kaszy, so a tiny crackling in a huge pile of groats. But what it's the thing is that looking at the statistics in 2002, there was 46,000 of Belarusians who declare themselves as nationality Belarusians, but passing to 2021, the census says that the number decrease of the like half, so just 23,000 of people declare themselves as a Belarusians. And there's a really nice thing to reflect on, is it's more about declaration, if it is it's more about the feeling of the identity, right? The identity crisis, or trying to kind of attach to the culture they are in. So why does Podlasie taste different? Why it's so different? Basing on this influence of Belarusian signs, we have those potato-centered dishes, groats, a lot of groats, mushrooms, wheat, fermented foods, baked peas and cuisine, and those examples of those dishes, which I don't have really me as a base on a different part of Poland. I'm from Podkarpacie, so the borderline with Ukraine and Slovakia. We do not have it in our cuisine at all. So we have bulbiana babka, bulbiana kiszka, klocki, draniki, maczanka. We really do not have it, and those are dishes from where Podlasie is really known for. Passing to some comparison of those recipes, the Belarusian one and the Podlasie one, they're really similar. Just the difference is between the meat they use, the amount of the herbs they use. We have maczanka here, so they're like a gravy based on flour, onion, some meat. So maczanka is to the gravy sauce to put things in. Yeah, and we have bulbiana babka, which is a baked dish based on potatoes. And the difference between those two recipes, it's mainly where they put the lard, and in Belarusian they put it inside, and the Podlasie one they put it on the top, and also they garnish it with some cucumber and some other stuff. So we pass through the really importance of potatoes, of wheat, the flour, but it's really important to highlight the importance of groats, as it's also influenced by has an influence in Orthodox Church and the traditions, as Kucia, for example, and during the Christmas, as the first dish, which is eaten. Yeah, so the groats mixed with the honey, raisins, yeah, and we have those different types of groats: buckwheat groats, barley groats, millet. So all of those were before the potatoes dominated the region, the regional cuisine, and yes, groats as a base of cuisine, which were inexpensive, really suited for those soils, poor soils, and yeah, and associated with the Orthodox Church and the fasting traditions as well. Yeah, so those three important ones. And passing to the conclusions, it's really important to highlight the identity survived longer even in the regional cuisine than the census declarations. Yeah, cuisine as something, as a heritage actually, as something which brings people together. I think really important in the terms of culture. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. That was delicious. And I certainly can testify that identity prevails for generations through cuisine, and especially regional cuisine. Isn't it fascinating? Our next presenter would be speaking online. This is Dr. Alla Pichalskaya. She's a visiting scholar with a varied research interests. Some of them are visual culture history and the everyday of Belarus, printing history of Belarus, visual culture and identity construction. And our has been a visiting scholar and a fellow in various universities, I think currently at the University of Bremen. Dr. Pichalskaya, can you hear us? And Alla's presentation will be on Yu-Hsuan Kulik and the photographic mediation of artistic autonomy in late Soviet Belarus. Jarek, can we make sure that we can hear the presenter? Wonderful. Yeah, I think we can hear Alla.
Put it on at the bottom right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
So, hello. My topic will be completely different comparing to previous one. I would like to speak about the relationships between official and uncensored culture in the Soviet Union, which has been for a long time framed as binary opposition, a state-sanctioned production on one side and underground or non-conformist activity on the other. Recent scholarship has begun to complicate this picture, drawing attention to the so-called in-betweeners, those who move between both spheres and questioning whether the sharp division that characterized such cities as Moscow and then Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, was equally effective across the broader Soviet space. This paper contributes with the case study of Belarusian graphic designer and book artist Yu-Hsuan Kulik, with particular attention to his use of photography as a medium that traversed and strategically blurred the boundary between official and uncensored artistic practice. Kulik is known primarily as a graphic artist, and two recent studies by Tatiana Ostrovskaya and Volga Lobachevskaya have studied distinct aspects of his career. His participation in underground activism, studied by Tatiana, and his role as a head of the Commission on Folk Art and work with folk masters at the BSSR Artists Union in recovering, and his role in recovering the artistic legacy of Yazdep Drozdovich and Elena Kish. Taken separately, each account is valuable. Taken together, they point to a tension that neither fully resolves, how the same artist could function simultaneously as an officially recognized head of the Artistic Union Commission and a successful book designer, as well as a key figure in uncensored cultural networks. This paper proposes that photography was essential to the double existence, serving not merely as a technical instrument, but a strategic medium through which Kulik negotiated the constraint of the Soviet system. Unlike Moscow and Leningrad, Minsk lacked the presence of foreign journalists and diplomatic staff whose attention had afforded some degree of protection to nonconformist artists in the Soviet capitals. Open dissent in Minsk carried greater risk. The strategies available to artists were accordingly different. At the same time, the institutionalization of design as a profession in BSSR during the 60s through the creation of Agit Plakat section at the BSSR Artists Union with Vladimir Krukovsky as a member of its editorial board. He is a colleague, friend, and co-author of the Pagonia coat of arms. The founding of the design department at the Belarusian Theatre and Art Institute and the establishment of the Belarusian branch of All Union Institute for Technical Aesthetics created a new professional space within which distribution of orders, materials, employment, official employment, and partly censorship was carried out by those institutions and artists themselves, so that experimentation was possible and to a degree structurally encouraged. Photography was part of that processes. This paper examines how photography functions in Kulik's practice across both official and uncensored registers, as a design tool in officially published books, as a medium for documentary and historical reconstructions, and as a vehicle for a quiet circulation of imagery, most notably the Pagonia coat of arms of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, banned under Soviet rule, that contested the official historical narrative of Soviet Belarus. The analysis draws on Kulik's published work, archival materials, and the testimony of contemporaries. It argues that the strategic ambiguity enabled by photography, its simultaneous legibility as a modern officially sanctioned medium, and its capacity for historical citation and visual dissent was not incidental to Kulik's practice, but constitutive of it, and that this case illuminates broader dynamics of artist negotiations on the Soviet periphery. The centrality of photography to artistic practice in late Soviet Belarus cannot be understood apart from the specific institutional and material conditions that shaped cultural production in the Republic during the 60s, 70s. Three intersected developments are particularly relevant: the industrialization of photographic equipment, the professionalization of book art and graphic design as a discipline, and the incorporation of photography into formal arts education. The mass production of cameras at Vavilov Minsk mechanical plant, founded in 1957, made photography newly accessible to broad professional and amateur public. This democratization of a medium aligned conveniently with the Soviet modernization agenda. Photography's association with modernity and technological progress gave it a degree of institutional legitimacy and other experimental practices lacked. At the same time, in the 60s, some professional institutions were founded, which I mentioned before, and these institutions created professional frameworks within which poster design, book design, and applied graphics acquired independent disciplinary status. The institutionalization of design did not simply expand the range of permissible subjects. It created new technical vocabularies, and photography was one among them. This was most visible in the art education. The photographic course at the Theater and Art Institute in Minsk taught students to exploit photography's formal properties as an artistic resource, the creation of textures for book design, the manipulation of tonal values, and the photo setting. This is an article from Technical Aesthetic magazine published in a huge print run telling about Minsk course Photographica, which was really famous. One of the example of application of this technique is like a book designed by Valentin Terentiev of poetry Ales Ryazanov, which employed photographic textures only. The other way photography was used is typefaces from journals published in Poland, East Germany, and Switzerland. Students learned to photograph and enlarge Western Latin typefaces, modify them into Cyrillic equivalents through photographic collage, assemble entirely new typographic compositions for book covers and posters as well. What might appear as a merely technical workaround was in practice a systematic exposure to Western graphic design vocabularies at a time when such exposure was otherwise tightly controlled. The overall logic governing photography's institutional role was instrumental to overcome material scarcity, less of typefaces for book design, also to signal modernity and to rationalize formal experimentation within the sanctioned web framework of socialist realism. Yet this instrumentality carried an internal contradiction by providing a legitimate technical rationale for formal experiment, one grounded in material realities of scarce resources and available technologies rather than in aesthetic and ideological dissent. Nevertheless, photography created conditions under which the boundaries of permissible visual language could be quietly extended. It did not, in most cases, produce overt political contestation, but practiced at scale across numerous publications and challenged homogeneity of social realism. So, that's also one how photography was used by Belarusian branch of All-Union Institute of Technical Aesthetic. Yeah, so against this broader institutional backdrop, Eugen Kulik's photographic practice stands out for both its range and conceptual coherence. Working as a book designer and illustrator for the official publishing houses such as Belarus and Mostatskaya Literatura, Kulik used photography not as a supplement to his graphic work, but as a structuring principle, one that operated differently across his official commissions and his uncensored activities while serving a consistent underlying agenda. In his book Design of the 1970s, Kulik photomontage work is distinguished by a quality unusual within Soviet visual culture. Michael Gardner's taxonomy of photomontage identifies two dominant modes. The Dadaist one, in which the collage openly displays its joint ruptures, and surrealist, in which photographic manipulation produces a seamless alternative reality that conceals its own construction. Soviet applications of photomontage characteristically favored the latter logic, producing images that presented themselves as document of an unmediated reality. Kulik's collages, by contrast, work in the Dadaist register. Rough cuts, white backgrounds that declare the space to be entirely constructed, and visible themes that make no pretense of illusionism. Books produced in visual language, such as illustrated edition of Vasily Zuyonok, for example, Sonячный клубочек, Sunny Ball, were nonetheless printed in large print runs by official publishing houses, which suggests that the formal departure from social realism was legible to editors without being treated as politically objectionable. A different dimension of Kulik's photographic practice is visible in his 1980s illustration for Pesня про Zubra, the song of the Bison by Mykola Husovsky, published by Mostacskaya Literatura. The illustrations are executed in woodcut technique, popular among Kulik generation artists because it was available, a technique historically associated with the era of Husovsky and Skavina. But several illustrations were based on photographic source material, including photographs and architectural reconstructions of Mir Castle, produced in collaboration with historian Mihai Tkachov. The use of photography here operates as a form of evidentiary grounding. The historical image functions as a document that anchors the illustration in a recoverable past, lending the work a register of scholarly authenticity. Photography serves as evidence rather than decoration, is what distinguishes Kulik's historicist practice from the more generalizing tendencies of Soviet historical illustration. The most politically charged instance of this strategy concerns the Pahonia, the coat of arms of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which was prohibited under Soviet rule. Kulik embedded a reference to the Pagonia with an illustration depicted the medieval knights' battle for Pesня про Zubra, deploying the image under the visual cover of historical battle scenes. Nearly the same time that his postcard printed in London with Pagonia, nearly the same time as Zenon Pozniak recounts, Kulik and his circle distributed photographic reproductions of the Pagonia widely in letters on some occasion at a time when such distribution could carry criminal prosecution. When Kulik was summoned by the KGB and shown a photograph of his own work, he confirmed his authorship without hesitation. Kulik's monogram embedded in the Pagonia drawing, in a manner that a layman might not even notice, is an emblem of this entire approach, authorship claimed and concealed simultaneously. The signature of an artist who understood exactly the terrain he was navigating. Crucially, as Pozniak notes, the submission of work for official exhibitions provided a degree of institutional protection, the legitimating frame of official culture offered. It's not immunity, then at least a complicated context for prosecution. Photography enabled the reproduction and distribution of the Pagonia image at scale. Its reproduction in book, even in this covered form, made the image credible with an official publication, and it created the ambiguity between illustration and document, between official commission and uncensored agenda that was essential to Belarusian context. The same logic extended to Kulik's institutional role as a head of commission on folk art and work with folk masters at the BSSR Artists Union, where exhibitions authorized by Soviet authorities were used to document historical monuments and ethnographic heritage. The collections of Jacek Drozdowicz and Elena Kish, artists whose work reference the history and visual culture of Western Belarus of before 1939, excluded from official Soviet narratives at that time, were preserved, exhibited, and eventually integrated into public collections through a process that Kulik helped orchestrate. Photography was the documentary medium through which this material was recorded, reproduced, and circulated. The painted carpets that Olga Lobachevskaya noted to have since entered official Belarusian culture passed through an intermediate zone of unofficial preservation and trajectories that Kulik's photographic and institutional practices helped make possible. Thus, this analysis, rather than treating official production as ideologically compromised and underground activity as a sole site of authentic artistic agency, Kulik's practice suggests that the boundaries between these spheres were actively managed, strategically traversed, and productively ambiguous. Photography was a cheap, reproducible, technically legitimate, yet formally flexible, was and was ideally suited to this traversal. In the absence of external visibility and support, the blurring of official and unofficial registers was not merely a stylistic preference, but a structural necessity. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ala. That was absolutely fascinating, and the illustrations, it's definitely something I would like to show and learn more about. And now we are on to the last presenter, Tatyana Vorobey, who will be presenting the fragmented emergence of Belarusian discourse around architectural heritage in the early 20th century, embellishes but brings sadness. Tatyana is a PhD researcher in the International Research Training Group, Baltic Peripetties, Narratives of Reformations, Revolutions and Catastrophes at the University of Greifswald in Germany. And her doctoral project focuses on the perception and preservation of Baroque monuments in the former Grand Duchy of Lithuania during the 19th century. Today, she will give a presentation on the emergence of Belarusian architectural heritage discourse in the early 20th century. Tatyana, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Here's my presentation on the emergence of the Belarusian architectural heritage discourse in the early 20th century. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, the rise of modern nations across Europe in the 19th century fostered interest in architectural heritage as an object of research, preservation, and inspiration for national styles. The development of art history and heritage conservation as disciplines also contributed to the production and spread of national narratives around architectural heritage. And recently, this topic has attracted a broad cohort of scholars in the field of heritage studies, mainly from Central and Eastern Europe, and a range of their publications kind of serve as my methodological basis. But if you look in the Belarusian case in this regard, we may notice that most publications on heritage interpretation are rather dedicated to later periods like interwar decades or our times. But when it comes to the late 19th century, many scholars tend to focus on the official heritage policies of the Russian Empire rather than local perspectives, local agency. And moreover, the development of this distinct Belarusian discourse was hindered by the exclusion of Belarusian language from publishing and education, while Russian and Polish languages dominated. So only the revolution of 1905 intensified the Belarusian movement by allowing Belarusian language in publishing, and this actually catalyzed reflections on local identity and What is this? This arrow. I use. I see them. Yeah, this one. Okay, sorry. I just. Okay. And this process is definitely centered around the newspaper Nasha Niva, published in Vilnius between 1906 1915. It probably needs no introduction for most of you, but let me make some. The paper became the main platform of the Belarusian movement and gathered a large circle of authors and activists who would become true legends of Belarusian literature, science, statehood, such as Anton Ivan Luskevich, Alexander Ulasov, Yanko Kupala, Vasyl Ostolsky, etc. It actually aimed to consolidate the Belarusian nation, both Catholics and Orthodox. That's why it was printed both in Latin and Cyrillic scripts until it's completely switched to Cyrillic due to financial constraints. It covered a vast range of topics through various sections like political reviews, literary works, correspondence from Belarus and Lithuania, international news, and built quite a loyal base of subscribers and contributors all over Belarus and even beyond, mainly among the rural intelligentsia. And as we will see, this network actually generated a substantial part of its content, I would say. So it was the most impactful Belarusian medium of this time. So I have chosen it as my sole source for this short study. Here I will analyze quite scattered, often intuitive reflections on Belarusian landscape and architecture that occurred in Nasha Niva. I will address the following 5 questions. First, how the concept of heritage and the associated vocabulary was shaped within the Belarusian discourse. Second, what role did architectural objects play in the canonical visions of the national landscape? Third, which types of objects received the most prominence, and does this suggest an emergent hierarchy of architectural heritage? Fourth, which architectural objects or features were regarded as examples and models for a national style? And fifth, to what extent was the idea of preserving architectural heritage present, and how did it interplay with the urge for modernization of the built environment? Well, let's start with the first question. We probably know that Nasha Niva contributed quite much to standardizing the modern Belarusian literary language, and it actually managed to shape some kind of vocabulary associated with architectural heritage. As the academic Nasha Niva dictionary and my own observation show, the Belarusian words for architecture and heritage, architectura and spatchina, rarely appear in the newspaper and never in the same sentence. Actually, instead of the term architectura, which is used today, Nasha Niva authors used words designated rather building as a process or a building as a product, like budovля, budova, and so on. And at the same time, the word for heritage, spatchina, much like its equivalents in other European languages, started to go beyond its literal meaning as a heritage property and started to gain meaning as cultural values left behind for future generations. But still, it was quite, it appears quite rarely. But at the same time, another word, monument, like its local variations across Europe, were applied more widely to designate some valuable ancient structures or pieces. And the Belarusian language of Nasha Niva offers a really broad variety of related vocabulary, influenced both by Russian and Polish. For example, the words pamyatka and pamyatnik were more common than, for example, pomnik that we use today. And these terms were often paired with the words like of the past. And here we see also impressive variety of words for the past, like starosvetchina, minushina, which were the most frequently used, and all these kind of words. A synonymic family of related adjectives designated something old or ancient is also quite striking. It's like старосветский, давний, старинный, одвечный, вековечный, and so on. At the same time, while the words for culture and history, kultura, historia, were quite straightforward, the terms for art varied between the Polish sztuka and Russian искусство and other synonyms. While the modern Belarusian word mastasa appeared quite late and rarely. Well, and here we can see actually the text likely authored by Anton Luskevich that illustrates the usage of these words. Oh, it's not. Yeah, sorry, this one. Here we can see this word spatchina, heritage, which is used like a dynamic cultural treasury. It's like this living process of cultural accumulation. Wow. Speaking about our second question, national landscape, the interest in architectural monuments during this period was closely linked to development of landscape as both a concept and artistic and literary genre. However, instead of terms Landschaft or Paysage, which were adopted in Russian and Polish, the Belarusian language preferred native words like obrazy, obrazki, meaning images or views. And landscape descriptions appear most prominently in travel notes, poetry, and regional correspondence. And most of these accounts adhere to critical realism. And since this reality was quite harsh, this landscape always carried this heavy socio-economical weight and mood of melancholy and hopelessness. I think most of you are familiar with this really self-deprecating vibe of Belarusian canonical poetry of this period. As Belarus was predominantly agrarian land at the time, natural and rural landscape prevailed, but rarely included any built objects except of some wretched little houses or barns and sheds, like in this example. Also, cities and towns had a lower percentage of ethnic Belarusians. The authors of Nasha Niva devoted much attention to these urban centers. However, most speakers focused on the current issues, such as poor infrastructure, heavy drinking, low literacy, low national awareness, and compared everything with darkness and constant sleep. Urban landscapes typically listed a full range of key local buildings, but focused mainly on their social function rather than on their history or beauty, but with some exceptions. For example, this text from Václav Lostovsky tried to spot similarities between different settlements or identify common visual identity across villages, small towns, cities, and so on. And landscapes were also present in images, which I wouldn't call illustrations, as they were mostly unrelated to the text in the newspaper. In total, I've identified around 40 photos featuring city panoramas, castle ruins, historical buildings, markets, nature, and rural views like this photo on the left were quite rare. While this panorama of Polotsk was published for some reason, even it was reproduced even twice within the same year. Unfortunately, starting from 1912, photos disappeared from the newspaper's pages due to financial constraints. So it was no longer this Белорусская газета с рисунками, Belarusian newspaper with images, as it's initially claimed to be. As you may have already noticed, Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, synagogues were always considered the most prominent features of the landscape, the most attractive building in every place. But if these structures were kind of neglected, they evoke the deepest reflections on history and memory, like in this text by Jadwigin Shah. These were quite detailed and poetic travel notes. He sees these abandoned churches in Ivanets no longer as some religious social spaces, but as true monuments of the past, and also valuable historical sources, which would open our eyes to more than one dark spot in our past life. Interestingly, the same church in Venice caught the attention of another author within the same year, and this passage really amazes me. I even took this praise, embellishes, but brings sadness as my title, because it combines this very romantic fascination with ruins, so this sublime, so typical of the 19th century, with quite a pragmatic regret that it's like the product of human labor has been lost in vain. Similarly, the ruins of castles and palaces also evoke this vivid image of the past, also linked with legends and tales, and also sometimes received this social and economical dimension. Like this correspondent from the small town of Romanovo, along with some historical reflections, wonders how many financial and human resources the construction of the castle required in the past. So it was still quite a Belarusian thing. But it's worth noting that during this period, history enthusiasts were still quite often more captivated by archaeological sites than by architecture. In both fiction and non-fiction of Nasha Niva, for example, burial mounds like Kurhane were always recognized as an ultimate and sometimes even sole true monuments of the past, heavily romanticized, like in the classical poem by Janko Kupala. And similar sentiment was, for example, to grandfathers' graves or wooden crosses by the road, but this is not like architectural heritage whatsoever. Okay.
Couple of minutes.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. We've got time.
Okay. As the search for typical features of the landscape served a very practical purpose of the consolidation of the nation and the formation of a national style. And this concept of national style was actually developed by Vasyl Rostovsky in a special article where he defines styles as the cultural peculiarities that determine the originality of a nation and their soul. And as this quote illustrates, architecture was viewed as one of the most essential manifestations of the national style, following the language and in traditional dress. And wooden buildings, traditional wooden buildings were meant to become the very essence of this national style, but of course not humble chimneyless huts, kurnia chaty, but such wooden church belfries, which were cited in this role for many times. It's like during the ethnographic concert in Vilnius, the Belarusian kiosk was even styled this way. And then such a belfry was put on the cover of the Belarusian calendar by National Niva, and later it was even used as a reference when the editorial office asked the readers to send them photos of wooden buildings in the Belarusian style. And even some multicultural heritage was kind of embraced. For example, this wooden synagogue was also cited as an example of the Belarusian style for 2 times. When it comes to practical implementation of the national style, you can see this fragment where local correspondents not only lament the destruction of an original old wooden church in Disna, no image has survived, but also complains about building a new one in an alien style, which he defines as Suzdal or Muscovite ones, like we see on this photo on the right, taking it from a different source. And he wonders why it wasn't possible to maintain a local Belarusian style, even though he doesn't specify what he means by that. Well, as you see from all the cited materials, both the staff and the audience of the newspaper already had some awareness of the value of architectural monuments, the idea of their preservation, but at the same time, the idea of progress and very pragmatic approach to the built environment was even more articulated in this discourse. The wooden architecture was a problem. It was very flammable, and fires were very often reported almost in every issue of the newspaper, and National Niva even published many materials on how to build fireproof houses from clay or brick, but it was supposed to change traditional building technology. While villages mainly stuck to wood, fires and subsequent reconstruction changed the physiognomy of many small towns and cities, where burnt wooden buildings were often replaced by brand new brick ones, like it's happened here in Novogrudok. And the need for modern infrastructure, especially in big cities, such as sewerage, public transport, paved street, bridges, was also frequently discussed in the newspaper. And at times, these practical needs came into conflict with heritage conservation. For example, to establish a water supply system in Vilna, an engineer proposed installing a water tank inside the castle hill. So it caused an organized protest among citizens, and here you can see the petition against it. I haven't found its original text, to be honest, and but I suppose there were people from various ethnic communities involved, not like Belarusians. Anyway, this anonymous report seems to align with some editor's view of this problem. And this was quite a short analysis of the architectural discourse in National Niva. I have to admit that it's remained quite fragmented, occasional, compared to more priority topics, and not always educated due to insufficient specialized knowledge. I would say that a lack of financial resources, local agency, physical ownership also hindered the participation of the Belarusian community in both study and preservation of architecture. But still, these results exceeded my own expectations, proving that even in the making, even at this early stage, architecture was becoming one of the pillars of Belarusian national identity. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. And we do have a fine example of Belarusian wooden architecture just outside. For those who haven't visited the Belarusian church, will have an opportunity to do so today. And I do hope you enjoyed all the presentations, which were really, really varied and fascinating. And we're looking forward to your questions. And if you're asking a question from the room, could you specify which presenter it might be directed at?
Yeah, maybe.
And we'll pass on the mic then.
As many panelists as possible to sit back here.
So hello. I hope it works. Do you hear me? Yeah. So I enjoyed all of your presentations. They were insightful and very rich in information. I have 3 questions. The first one is to you about the Belarusian cinema. What about the language that was used in those films? Was it only Russian or also Belarusian? And then to Katarzyna, I really enjoyed your presentation. It was very delicious. And I have a particular question because I know that in Belarus and also in Lithuania, Shalty Barszczaj and Chalotnik is very popular. And does it also appear in Podlasian cuisine? And the third question would be to you, Tatiana. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I was wondering whether we could have longer discussion on Nasza Niwa, because it's also my special field I'm working at, and I'm very curious about the linguistical side of your analysis. About, for example, lexemes that are used for describing churches, and also, the Catholic and the Orthodox traditions. Did you find out something about that? Thank you very much.
So one round of questions and one round of replies. Otherwise, we'll have time for anything. Any more questions in the room? Yeah. So introduce yourself so that people can.
Okay, I'm Vera Khabonova from Edinburgh University. So I wanted to ask Elizaveta, and I apologize in advance because this may be completely outside of the topic that you researched, but I wondered if there is modern Belarusian ecopoetry, as in, does it reflect on the current climate crisis, or is poetry now overshadowed by other types of trauma? And if it exists, does it also express the main theme of premature defeat, or does it express any type of this care of endangered landscapes like drained peatlands or others?
That's probably the last one.
Kurt Wohlheiser, Department of Belarusian Studies at Warsaw University. I had a question for Tatiana. A very, very interesting presentation. I was curious about the Lithuanianism doilidstva, and whether that word entered the lexicon in the Nasza Niwa period, or if that's something that appears later. And it appears to almost function as an equivalent to the Russian zodchество. Did you encounter that word in Nasza Niwa, or perhaps that's 1920s? But,
thank you. And Carolina?
I have questions to every presenter. I don't know whether I may. Thank you, all of you, very much. The first question is about Belarusian
couple of steps there, then
Belarusian cinema. Are you aware of any influence between the production of those films? You said there were 10 of them in the 20s, and the work of the art school in Vitebsk, Unavis, which was functioning roughly at the same time, whether any images were used in the posters, but made by the artists of that group. And then a question to Kasia. You mentioned that Kutya is a part of the Orthodox tradition and therefore part of the influence on the identity. Is it true that there is no Kutya tradition in the Catholic population? Roman Catholic, yes. Yeah. I need to remember my question to Elizaveta. The ecopoetry, there was a Christian element, like the revival of Christianity in those poems, but I also noticed references to pagan gods, Perun, for instance, and they go alongside each other. Would you say that there was a growing interest in those poems to the roots and the ancient traditions, pre-Christian traditions, as well as Christian? And
one more thing.
just one more. I wonder whether in your study you had a chance to differentiate between various editors. For instance, the language of Ivan Anton Lutskevich and the language of Václav Lastovsky. And I'm particularly interested in the role of Václav Lastovsky in that discourse. And also, I know that you focused on the newspapers, but Lastovsky in 1910 published his Korotkaya Historia Belarusi, where he's already speaking about pomniki, architectural buildings as part of our heritage, and I believe that he's doing it for the first time. So do you think the study of monographs and publications other than newspapers could enhance the argument? Thank you.
Yeah, the chair will ensure that people will have at least no more than 3 minutes for.
Very good. Over to you. You take a seat there.
Thank you. Firstly, to your question about language use, it really differs in different national republics, but this colonizatia policy, it was introduced around 1923-24, but it was not kind of really implemented until around 95 or 96. So the language use, it depends for the Belarusian case, because it's all silent film, so it's intertitles between the scenes, and we have to remember that these are films made 100 years ago, so some of them were lost. So from those 10 films, not I found, but I'm aware of, some of them they do have Belarusian intertitles, but some of them were cut. They're not complete because might certain actor, certain director later became enemy of people or for different reasons. So some of them are not complete. And the use of Belarusian language were really in public around 26 to maybe 28, 29, because around 28, 29, Stalin actually took the full control and the centralization became more harsher. So you will see that all the official publications, all the conference proceedings will switch back to Russian again. Yeah. And to your question, to my knowledge, I don't think so, based on the materials I have. But thank you, it's a direction I should explore. Maybe some of them actually got involved, but as I say that Belgoskino was centered in Leningrad, so chances are good that it's only like a small office organization for like 4 or 5 people. They might simply use like local artists to produce posters. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a beautiful question. I will try to ask as quick as I can. So there about your question about eco-criticism and the recent literature about climate change, global warming. I think that is a very interesting question because here we can see how the eco-poetry and eco-writing is very politically charged. In its nature, because it is being in the process of constant resignification of the relationship between human and human actors and about nature. I would say that the choice of writing about nature right now in Belarusian literature, both in Belarusian and in Russian, is more about the way how to write about your heritage, about your ancestry, by also being able to be published in Belarus. And I think this is also has to do with the new kind of turn to the gardening practices, to the practices of self-care and new appearing of new self that is being connected to nature and to surrounding and kind of care about something around you. So yeah, even though, for example, the Russophone novel by Darya Trident, Gribные места, it explores the topic of gardening, the nature and the climate. There is also a art initiative group, Zelenina, that explores the topic of global warming and the kind of Belarusian style of living with nature. And about this, the second question, the Christian and non-Christian, but also pagan revival narrative, it is very interesting because we can see that these biblical plots and the image of apocalypse and Christian gods and pagan gods are one of the most prevalent images. And also I think the most prevalent genre is prayer, like it's been in the title, which I don't see now. But what we can see based on the paganism, I think we can compare it to the Maria Yanin's scholarship with Uncanny Slavdom and the way how this pre-baptized identity was suppressed, but it can be used to the new forms of political engagement and new ways of knowing something about yourself. So this is definitely, I think, that we can study within this like paganism as a new source of identity scholarship. Thank you.
A question to Kasia about Chladnik, yeah?
Sure, about Chladnik. We do have in Poland. It's quite famous, but we even call it as a Chłodnik Litewski, so Lithuanian Chłodnik. And in Podlasie, there is an invention of Symborek, which is like a chłodnik based on cucumbers. There's no beetroot. Cucumbers. Yes. Yes. And when it comes to Katarzyna question about Kutia, we do not have it in the Roman Catholic Church traditions. But based on my family, it was introduced to my family, and now it is a part of Christmas, as we are really influenced by the Ukraine side. Even during Christmas, we do the kolenda. We go from house to house singing songs, carols. We sing in Ukrainian. So maybe that's why. Yes. Thank you.
I think that's a few questions for Tatiana.
Thank you very much for your questions. Yeah, I'm not a linguist myself, but I have two linguistic questions. The first one, speaking about this Orthodox Catholic vocabulary, as you may have noticed, they still used the same words for two different words for Roman Catholic and Orthodox churches, like Kostola Cerkva. Yeah, it still was, it was present already. But when it comes to this highlighting the difference, they had the opposite aim, actually. They tried to step away from this religious factor. They really wanted to consolidate the nation because Orthodox believers tended to consider themselves Russians and so on, and they really competed with the Russian and Polish newspapers for their attention, and they even argued with some of them when one Russian newspaper blamed them, like, "Oh, you published only Roman Catholic churches because you're a Polish intrigue." And they said, "No, we never do that. We never publish religious buildings like on the photos." It wasn't completely true, because if you publish a city panorama, it's inevitably here, right? But at least they said it's not our aim. We don't do that. We don't focus on this. And when it comes to these wooden buildings, they didn't necessarily highlight whether it's Catholic or Orthodox. It was like they really aimed for this unity rather than difference. Yeah.
And there was another question about doilitstvo.
Yeah, a good question, because I tried my best to find this word using like real human search, automatic search, and I also checked this academic National dictionary, but I never found it at the time. It was rather all these words with the bud stem. It's like budowla, budownictwo, budowla, everything, but I haven't found doilitstvo. Yeah, sorry. Okay, and when it comes to the third question, I think I wasn't able to really track probably all these differences depending on the editor-in-chief and so on. But yeah, I think the impact of Wacław Lastowski was really strong, because he published a lot of texts like this one on Bychow. It was, there are a couple of other similar texts published, for example, it was like a report about some exhibition, but he added every time all these descriptions, some historical facts and so on. And he was particularly fascinated, for example, with medieval Polotsk history or something like this. But, and also there was a very famous debate. It was under pseudonyms, but it turns out it was Wacław Lastowski against Janka Kupala, because it was Lastowski actually asked Belarusian authors to stop complaining and whining all the time. It's like, let's be positive, let's write about the beauty of our landscape, of our cities, and yeah. But Janko Kupala still said, we are not sentimentalists, we are true friends to the ordinary people, so we have to speak about the problems as well. So yeah, but when it comes to Korotka Historia Belarusi, it was actually first published on the pages of Nasza Niwa, and I didn't find very much references to the architectural heritage there, and I haven't found a lot of specialized literature beyond Nasza Niwa, so I decided to stick to it, because it's a very mainstream public discourse. Like everything which was important to the public was there. So yeah, there was not yet such a specializations. I haven't found many significant publications. Yeah. That's it.
Does anyone feel that their questions were not answered or not fully answered? And are there any new ones? Any follow-ups? Are there any questions online, possibly? How can we find out? I think I might need Yarek's direction just to see if there are any questions online. Anyone following online? Well, I just wanted to check if there are any online questions, because that would be somewhere in Zoom. Well, if not, then perhaps we'll save them for later. And we have to thank our esteemed panelists and move on to the networking break. We still have time at least until 12:15, maybe a bit longer because we had a slightly later start. Thank you all very much.